On the morning of my second child's birth, while I was 6 centimeters dilated and gripping a plastic hospital rail so hard my fingers went numb, my husband sent me a text that said he'd be stuck in a mandatory 3-day executive meeting. 20 minutes later, I saw a $4,782 charge from Delta Airlines hit our joint credit card. If you already feel your stomach tightening, then you understand why I didn't cry. I went very, very quiet instead. Before I tell you what happened next, take 1 second to hit like and subscribe, because if you've ever had someone betray you at the exact moment you needed them most, this story is going to hit deeper than you expect. And I promise you, the ending will be worth staying for. My name is Danielle Carter. I was 32 years old that spring, living in Chandler, Arizona, working as a medical billing specialist for a private orthopedic clinic. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid $62,000 a year, came with decent insurance, and most importantly, it gave me stability. Stability mattered to me because I grew up without it. When I met my husband, Christopher Miles Carter, he felt like the opposite of chaos. Chris was a regional sales manager for a solar panel company, always dressed sharply, always confident, always speaking like he knew where life was going. We got married after 2 years of dating. Our first child, Emma, was born 3 years later. And when I got pregnant again, Chris told everyone we were finally complete. He just didn't mention that he was already planning an escape route. The morning I went into labor started like any other Tuesday. Chris kissed my forehead at 6:15 a.m., smelling faintly of his expensive cologne and coffee. "Big meeting today," he said, buttoning his shirt. 3 days in Scottsdale. I might not be reachable. I remember pausing. 3 days? During my due week? He smiled the smooth, practiced smile that used to make me feel safe. "It's mandatory, Danny. You know how corporate is." He kissed my belly before leaving. That was the last time he touched me as his wife. By 10:03 a.m., I was in active labor at Mercy Gilbert Medical Center. My contractions were 5 minutes apart. My sister, Lauren Carter Bennett, sat beside me holding my hand while texting Chris updates. No reply. At 11:27 a.m., while a nurse adjusted my IV, my phone buzzed with the bank notification. Delta Airlines, $4,782.16. I frowned. That wasn't a meeting expense. Our company didn't reimburse flights that high, and definitely not through our personal card. A cold feeling slid into my stomach. I opened the transaction details. 2 first-class tickets. Phoenix to Honolulu. Departure time, 12:45 p.m. today. I stared at the screen so long that Lauren noticed. "What's wrong?" I didn't answer at first. Instead, I opened our shared email account. And there it was. The confirmation email. 2 tickets under the names Christopher M. Carter, Vanessa Lynn Porter. I didn't recognize the name, but I recognized the seat selection. Chris always insisted on aisle seats because he hated feeling trapped. For a moment, I genuinely thought my brain had misfired, like maybe the pain meds were making me hallucinate. Then another email appeared. A hotel confirmation. 4 Seasons Resort, Maui. Oceanfront suite. 5 nights. Total cost? $11,640. Paid in full. My hands started trembling. Not from grief. Not from rage. From clarity. It felt like the exact second a glass shatters, and you suddenly see the world without distortion. Lauren whispered, "Danny, talk to me." I turned the phone toward her. She read silently. Her face drained of color. "Oh my God," she said. I didn't cry. Instead, I asked the nurse for another pillow and calmly said, "Can you also bring me the Wi-Fi password?" Because at that moment, something inside me had already shifted. You see, betrayal doesn't always explode. Sometimes it freezes. Sometimes it turns you into a calculator. And that's exactly what happened to me. While I labored through contractions, I started gathering data. Chris's company had no conference scheduled. His Google Calendar, still synced to our shared account, showed blank entries for the next 5 days. His work laptop, which he'd left at home, was still logged into his corporate Slack. And at 12:02 p.m., while I was breathing through another contraction, a message popped up in the sales leadership channel. "Chris, enjoy your PTO. You've earned it." PTO. Not a meeting, a vacation with another woman. At 12:41 p.m., I checked the Delta flight status. Boarding. At 12:55 p.m., My son's heart monitor beeped steadily beside me. At 1:03 p.m., I finally sent Chris a text. It was only 5 words. Hope Hawaii is worth it. He read it instantly. But he didn't reply, and that silence told me everything. Now here's something I want to ask you, because I still wonder about it even today. What would you have done in that moment? Would you have called him screaming? Would you have demanded answers? Or would you have done what I did and said nothing at all? Because silence, I learned that day, can be more terrifying than anger. At 2:17 p.m., my son, Noah Carter, was born. 7 pounds, 11 ounces. Perfectly healthy. He cried loudly, like he was announcing his arrival to a world that had just collapsed for his mother. As the nurse placed him on my chest, I felt something strange. Not sadness, not heartbreak. Just a quiet, steel-cold certainty forming inside me. Because in that moment, holding my newborn while staring at the hospital ceiling lights, one truth became crystal clear. Chris didn't just cheat on me. He abandoned me at the most vulnerable moment of my life. And in the state of Arizona, abandonment during childbirth had very specific legal implications in divorce court. Implications Chris clearly didn't know about, but I did. Because billing specialists read everything. Insurance contracts, medical liability clauses, legal fine print. And at that moment, I realized something else. Chris thought he was escaping. He had no idea he had just handed me the most expensive mistake of his life. That night, while my newborn slept beside me in a plastic bassinet and the hospital hallway lights dimmed, I opened one more email. It was from an unfamiliar sender. Subject line: "You deserve to know the truth about Chris." My finger hovered over the screen because deep down, I already sensed this wasn't just an affair. It was something much bigger. And when I finally tapped the email open, the first sentence made my heart stop. "This isn't the first time your husband has done this." I opened that email at 11:48 p.m., less than 10 hours after giving birth, with hospital bracelets still tight around my wrist, and exactly $11,640 charged to our joint credit card for a hotel room I would never see. The first sentence read, "He's been taking women to Hawaii twice a year for the past 3 years." I didn't gasp. I didn't sob. I adjusted Noah's blanket, checked the IV in my arm, and kept reading. If you've ever felt the floor drop beneath you but somehow stayed standing, you know the feeling. And before we go any further, if you've ever uncovered a truth that rewrote your entire marriage in one sitting, comment, "I would have stayed calm too," or "I would have exploded." I genuinely want to know. The email was from someone named Melissa Grant. No last name at first, just Melissa. She wrote in short, clean sentences. No drama, no exaggeration, just information. She said she used to work in accounting at Chris's company. She said she noticed unusual reimbursements flagged as client acquisition travel. She said the destinations were always Honolulu. She said the companion ticket was never expensive. It was paid privately. She attached screenshots, credit memos, expense reports, calendar blocks labeled Strategic Planning Summit, none of which existed on the company's actual event schedule. My contraction pain was gone by then, replaced with a different kind of tightening in my chest. Twice a year, 3 years. That meant this started when Emma was still in diapers. That meant this wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern. There's something about discovering repetition that hurts more than discovering betrayal. A single affair can be weakness. A routine is intention. I scrolled further. Melissa wrote, "I didn't say anything before because I didn't have proof he was married. I found your Facebook today when he posted a beach photo and tagged her. I saw you in his profile picture with your kids." Tagged her. My hand stilled. I opened Instagram. Chris's account was private, but I still followed him. And there it was. A story posted 37 minutes earlier. A champagne glass, an ocean sunset, a woman's tanned leg in the corner of the frame. Caption, "Finally unplugging." No mention of a meeting. No mention of his wife in labor. I tapped the tagged name. Vanessa Lynn Porter. Public profile. Blonde. Fitness influencer. 28 years old. Based in Phoenix. Her most recent post was from the airport lounge. Caption, "When business trips turn into blessings." The comments were full of heart emojis. One comment from Chris read, Couldn't imagine this week with anyone else. Anyone else. My son stirred beside me, and I placed my palm gently over his tiny back. There's a strange clarity that comes when humiliation burns off and leaves nothing but precision. I went back to Melissa's email. At the bottom, she included her full name, Melissa Ann Grant. She ended with, "You may want to check your mortgage statements too." Mortgage statements. Now that caught my attention. Because Chris handled the mortgage. We bought our 4-bedroom house in Chandler for $412,000 in 2020. I contributed $40,000 from my savings toward the down payment. Chris insisted he'd manage the rest. At the time, I trusted him. At 12:22 a.m., while Noah slept and Lauren dozed in the chair, I logged into our joint bank portal. I navigated to the mortgage payment history. The monthly payment was $2,187. It had always been auto-drafted, except for 3 months last year. 3 months marked manual adjustment. I clicked the statements. The payment amount during those months was lower, $1,300. Partial payments. Late fees applied. My heart beat slower. Not faster, slower. Because this wasn't just an affair. This was financial manipulation. I opened the escrow breakdown. Property taxes were up to date. Insurance was active. But there was a second lien listed, $38,000. Home equity line of credit, opened 18 months ago. Primary borrower, Christopher Miles Carter. Secondary borrower, none. I wasn't listed. I stared at the screen. In Arizona, community property laws are very clear. Any debt incurred during marriage can impact both spouses. But opening a line of credit without disclosure is a serious issue in divorce proceedings. Serious. I checked the transaction history tied to the HELOC. Withdrawals, $12,000. Investment, $8,500. Marketing, $6,200. Travel, $4,300. Personal, $7,000. Cash advance. The timeline matched the Hawaii trips. I leaned back against the hospital pillow. This wasn't just cheating. This was siphoning marital assets. And here's the part that still chills me. He thought I'd never notice. Because I was just a medical billing specialist. Because I worked with insurance codes, not corporate spreadsheets. Because I was pregnant and tired and distracted. Underestimate a quiet woman long enough, and she starts counting. At 12:47 a.m., my phone buzzed. "Chris," he finally replied. 3 words. "Don't do this." Don't do what? Expose him? Ask questions? Exist? I typed back 1 sentence. "We'll talk when you get home." He didn't respond again. But at 1:05 a.m., his Instagram story disappeared. Deleted. Which meant he knew. And that meant he was afraid. But afraid of what? Being caught? Or something deeper? Because Melissa's final line echoed in my head. This isn't the first time. Not just Hawaii. Not just Vanessa. Not just money. There was something else. Something I hadn't uncovered yet. At 2:18 a.m., exactly 24 hours after I first saw that Delta charge, another email arrived from Melissa. Subject line, "There's one more thing." And this time, there was an attachment. APDF. Titled, Beneficiary Update Form. At 2:19 a.m., while the hospital hallway lights hummed and my newborn son slept less than 2 feet away from me, I opened a PDF titled Beneficiary Update Form that had been submitted exactly 214 days earlier. The name listed under primary beneficiary was not mine. It was Vanessa Lynn Porter. For a few seconds, I genuinely thought I was misreading it, because this wasn't a credit card charge or a hidden loan. This was something far more serious. This was Chris's life insurance policy. The total coverage amount sat clearly in bold near the top. $750,000. $750,000. And the form showed a digital signature, time-stamped at 3:12 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. While I was at work. While I was pregnant with his second child. While I believed we were planning our future. Before we go further, I want to ask you something. Because this moment still feels unreal, even now. If you discovered that your spouse quietly removed you as the beneficiary of their life insurance while you were carrying their child, would you confront them immediately? Or would you keep reading like I did, piece by piece, until you understood the full picture. Because I didn't react, I went into analysis mode. Medical billing teaches you to look for patterns in fine print, and that document had details most people would overlook. The employer listed was Chris's company. The policy provider was a corporate group plan through his job, which meant something important. Changing a beneficiary required HR processing and internal documentation. This wasn't a private decision. It left a paper trail. I scrolled to the bottom. There was a witness line, signed by someone in HR. Name: Thomas Reynolds. I recognized it immediately. Tom Reynolds was Chris's direct supervisor. He had attended our baby shower for Emma years ago. He'd shaken my hand, told me Chris was one of the most reliable men in leadership. Reliable. The word almost made me laugh. I opened the email body again. Melissa had written, "I shouldn't be sending this, but I couldn't stay silent after today." He didn't just change the beneficiary. He requested a copy of the policy payout timeline. Payout timeline. My chest tightened slightly, because that phrase had only one purpose. It meant he'd asked how quickly the money would be released after a claim, not if. How fast. There's a specific type of cold fear that doesn't involve panic. It feels like the room gets very quiet. That's what I felt in that hospital bed at 2:26 a.m. I wasn't thinking he wanted to hurt me. Not yet, but I was thinking something else. Chris was planning a future where I didn't exist financially, and he was preparing for it carefully. At 2:30 a.m., I did something that probably saved me months, maybe years of legal damage later. I forwarded every email, every attachment, every screenshot to a brand new Gmail account, one Chris didn't know about. I labeled the folder Documentation because by that point, I wasn't dealing with a cheating husband. I was dealing with a financial adversary. And here's a truth I wish more women understood. The moment betrayal becomes strategic, your response must become strategic too. Around 3 a.m., Lauren stirred in the chair. She saw my face. "Danny, what now?" I handed her the phone. She read silently. Her eyes widened. "He replaced you?" "Yes." "With his mistress?" "Yes." She sat back slowly. That's not normal cheating." "No, it wasn't." And that was when a thought surfaced in my mind for the first time, a quiet, unsettling one. What if this wasn't just about an affair or money? What if Chris was planning to leave entirely, not just emotionally, but legally and financially, in a way that would minimize his obligations? Because removing a spouse from a life insurance policy while taking out secret loans and draining marital funds pointed toward one clear goal: preparing for divorce without consequences, and maybe something even colder. At 3:17 a.m., my phone buzzed again. Another email from Melissa. Short this time. Just one sentence. "You should know Vanessa believes you already agreed to the divorce." My stomach dropped. Agreed? I had never discussed divorce with Chris. Not once. I opened Vanessa's public Instagram again, scrolled through older posts, and then I saw it. A photo from 2 months ago. Vanessa, standing on a beach, smiling, holding a champagne flute. Caption: "Cheers to new beginnings, and finally closing old chapters." One comment caught my eye. From a friend. "So happy he's finally free." And Vanessa had replied, "He's been separated for a while. Papers are just taking time." Separated. Papers. My hands went still. Because in Arizona, divorce filings are public record. If Chris had filed anything, there would be documentation. At 3:26 a.m., I opened the Maricopa County court portal on my phone. I typed his full name, Christopher Miles Carter. Search. One result appeared. Case type: petition for dissolution of marriage. File date: 46 days ago. Petitioner: Christopher Miles Carter. Respondent: Danielle Elizabeth Carter. Status: pending service. Pending service. That meant he had filed for divorce nearly 7 weeks earlier and never told me. In Arizona law, once a divorce petition is filed, there are automatic temporary restraining orders on financial actions, meaning neither spouse can transfer large assets without disclosure. But he'd continued withdrawing money, taking loans, changing beneficiaries, traveling with another woman, violating court orders I didn't even know existed. At that exact moment, something inside me settled. Not shattered, not broke, settled. Like a lock clicking into place. Because now, The truth had layers. Layer 1. He cheated. Layer 2. He hid finances and filed for divorce secretly. But there was still a third layer. Something Melissa hadn't explained yet. Something hinted at in her earlier messages. And I didn't have to wait long. At 3:41 a.m., another email arrived. Subject line: "Please don't panic." Inside was a single sentence and one attached screenshot. The sentence read, "He's been telling people you're unstable and medically unfit to care for the kids." My heart stopped because beneath that message was a screenshot of an internal company Slack conversation. Chris had written, "I'm documenting everything in case I need emergency custody." At 3:42 a.m., less than 12 hours after giving birth, I stared at a Slack message my husband had written 19 days earlier that said he was documenting everything so he could seek emergency custody of our 2 children. The timestamp showed 2:14 p.m. The same afternoon he had texted me, "Hope you're resting. Love you." If you've ever had someone smile at you while quietly building a case to erase you from your own life, you know the kind of cold that settles into your bones. And before we go further, tell me honestly in the comments, would you have confronted him right then? Or would you have stayed silent and gathered more proof? Because I chose silence, not out of weakness, out of strategy. The screenshot Melissa sent showed more than just Chris's message. There were replies from coworkers. One wrote, "Smart move. Courts take mental stability seriously." Another said, "Document everything, especially postpartum risks." Postpartum. My throat tightened. Chris had been planting a narrative. He wasn't just planning to leave. He was planning to win. And to win custody, he needed something very specific. Evidence that I was unstable, incapable, or unsafe as a parent. I scrolled further down the screenshot. Chris had written another line. "She's already had emotional episodes during pregnancy. Doctor mentioned monitoring." That sentence hit me like a punch, because it was technically true. During my 3rd trimester, I'd experienced severe anxiety attacks common with high-risk pregnancies. I had confided in him privately. He had accompanied me to one OB appointment, and now he was weaponizing it. That was the moment I understood something chilling. Chris wasn't just abandoning me. He was trying to legally erase me. At 4 a.m., I closed my eyes for the first time that night. Not to sleep, to think. Medical billing requires pattern recognition. Legal battles require timing. And I suddenly realized something critical. He believed I didn't know any of this, which meant he hadn't adjusted his behavior yet. That gave me an advantage, because people reveal the most when they think they're winning. At 6:12 a.m., the hospital room filled with pale morning light. Lauren woke and immediately saw my face. "You didn't sleep." "No," I said calmly, "but I figured out what he's doing." I handed her the phone. She read the custody messages. Her jaw clenched. "He's trying to paint you as mentally unstable." "Yes." Her voice shook with anger. "That's disgusting." I shook my head slowly. "No, it's calculated. Because here's something people don't understand until they experience it. The most dangerous betrayals are quiet ones. They happen through paperwork, through narratives, through carefully planted doubt. Not screaming, not fighting, just documentation." At 7:03 a.m., my OB, Dr. Melissa Harding, entered the room for rounds. She was a calm woman in her early 40s who had delivered both my children. She smiled warmly. "How are you feeling, Danielle?" I hesitated. Then I made a decision. "Dr. Harding, can I ask something confidential?" She pulled up a chair immediately. "Of course." I swallowed. If someone wanted to claim I was mentally unfit after childbirth, what kind of evidence would they need? Her expression changed. Not shocked. Serious. "Well," she said carefully, "courts look for documented psychiatric diagnoses, hospitalization, or demonstrated risk to the child." I nodded. "And routine anxiety during pregnancy?" "Very common," she said firmly. "Not grounds for custody concerns." Her tone carried something else. Concern for me. I took a slow breath. "Would you be willing to provide a statement confirming my medical stability if needed?" She didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." Relief moved quietly through my chest. Because Chris had overlooked something fundamental. Doctors document facts, not narratives, and facts were on my side. At 8:25 a.m., after Lauren left to pick up Emma from preschool, I was alone with Noah. The room was quiet, machines humming softly, sunlight falling across the bassinet. And for the first time since this began, I let myself feel something. Not grief, not rage, but clarity. Chris thought he was playing a long game, but he underestimated one thing. I understood systems. Insurance systems, financial systems, legal systems, and every system leaves records. Records that tell the truth when people don't. At 9:11 a.m., my phone buzzed again. A text from Chris. His first message since the night before. "Can we talk tonight? Please don't involve lawyers yet." I stared at the words. Not, "How are you?" Not, "How's the baby?" Not, "I'm sorry." Just concern about lawyers. That told me everything. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I opened Melissa's previous emails again, and that's when I noticed something I had missed. One attachment file name. It wasn't opened yet. It was labeled Expense Authorization, Special Approval, dated 4 months ago. Approved by Tom Reynolds, the same supervisor who witnessed Chris's life insurance change. My pulse slowed. Because special approval in corporate expense language usually meant something unusual, something outside policy, something that required justification. At 9:26 a.m., I tapped the file open. It was a reimbursement form for $23,500. Purpose listed. Client incentive package. But the supporting documentation attached wasn't for business entertainment. It was a wire transfer receipt sent to an individual. Name: Vanessa Porter. Memo line: relocation assistance. My hands went still. Relocation. That meant Chris wasn't just planning vacations. He was planning a new life. A life funded with company money, which crossed a very dangerous line. Because misusing corporate funds isn't just unethical, it's fraud. At that moment, something shifted again inside me. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. This was bigger, much bigger. Because if Chris had been diverting company resources to support his affair, he hadn't just betrayed me, he had committed a crime. And crimes create leverage, the kind of leverage that changes everything. But there was still one question echoing in my mind. How far had he gone? Because as I scrolled to the bottom of that expense form, I saw a note typed in small gray text. Pending final approval upon completion of separation proceedings. Separation proceedings, meaning his company knew he was divorcing me before I did. And that meant someone else had been involved, helping him, protecting him, possibly even coaching him. At 9:41 a.m., my phone buzzed again. Another message from Melissa, this time just 5 words. "You don't know about Denver." At 9:42 a.m., less than 24 hours after delivering my son, and exactly 46 days after my husband secretly filed for divorce, I received a message that said 5 simple words. "You don't know about Denver." I stared at the screen for a long time. Denver wasn't on any of the credit card statements I'd seen. Not on the flight logs. Not on the expense reports. Hawaii, yes. Maui, specifically. But Denver, if you're listening to this and you feel that slow tightening in your chest, the kind that tells you there's still another layer, you're right. And I want to ask you something right now. When the lies keep multiplying, do you dig deeper? Or do you finally walk away? Because at that point, I could have stopped. I had enough for divorce, enough for custody defense, enough for financial misconduct. But something in my gut told me Denver wasn't about another woman. It was about something operational, something foundational. I typed back one word to Melissa. "What?" She responded within 2 minutes. "Search property records in Denver County under an LLC. ANLLC. Limited Liability Company." My pulse slowed into that steady analytical rhythm again. Because forming an LLC while married, using marital funds without disclosure, is a serious legal issue in community property states. At 10:03 a.m., I opened the Colorado Secretary of State Business Search Portal. I typed in Chris's full name, nothing. Then I tried variations. Christopher Carter, Chris M. Carter, still nothing. Then I searched by registered agent address. Phoenix, Arizona. 3 results appeared. One of them caught my eye immediately. Red Mesa Consulting, LLC. Registered 8 months ago. Managing member, C.M. Carter. Registered address, a small office building in Denver, Colorado. Formation date, the same week he opened the $38,000 HELOC. I felt the blood drain from my face. Because LLCs are often used for side businesses, or asset transfers, or shielding income. I clicked deeper into the filing history. There was an initial capital contribution listed, $40,000, exactly the amount withdrawn from the HELOC in staggered transfers. And then I saw something that made my hands go completely still. Registered co-manager, Vanessa L. Porter, not just a mistress, a business partner. This wasn't romance. This was relocation strategy. I leaned back slowly against the hospital pillow. Because Denver isn't Hawaii. Denver is where you move when you're building something long-term. And I suddenly remembered something small. 3 months ago, Chris had casually mentioned that his company was exploring expansion into Colorado. At the time, I barely paid attention. Now it clicked. Red Mesa Consulting. Solar industry adjacent name. Possible subcontractor shell. If he planned to transition clients to his own LLC, that would explain the client incentive packages. It would explain the $23,500 relocation transfer. It would explain why his supervisor approved it quietly. This wasn't just an affair. It was a coordinated exit. Financially, geographically, legally. And I was the only one not informed. At 10:22 a.m., my phone buzzed again. Chris, Danny, please answer me. I let it ring. Then he texted again. Vanessa doesn't know you weren't served yet. There it was. The first crack. Not an apology. Not remorse. Damage control. He wasn't afraid I'd leave. He was afraid his timelines would collapse. I typed back slowly. I know about Denver. 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. His reply came 90 seconds later. You're misunderstanding everything. Of course I was. That's always the first defense. Deny, minimize, reframe. Classic sequence. But here's something interesting about men who plan exits. They rehearse conversations. What they don't rehearse is being outpaced. At 10:37 a.m., Melissa emailed again. This time, she attached something different. A screenshot of an internal email chain. Subject, transition strategy. Q4. Chris had written, once dissolution is finalized, I'll be relocating primary residence to Denver. Arizona assets will be restructured. Arizona assets. Restructured. That word is very specific in corporate language. It usually means liquidation, transfer, or concealment. But here's the part that made my stomach turn. Tom Reynolds replied in the thread, make sure custody is secured before the move. Courts complicate relocation if minors are involved. Custody secured before the move. This wasn't hypothetical. This was a plan, a full operational strategy. And suddenly, everything made sense. Why he filed 46 days ago. Why he documented my anxiety. Why he changed beneficiaries. Why he drained funds. Why he told Vanessa he was already separated. Because he believed once the divorce was finalized, he'd relocate to Denver with partial custody, maybe primary custody, and I'd be left financially destabilized in Arizona. But here's what he didn't account for. He filed for divorce. But he never served me, which meant legally, the clock hadn't fully started, which meant his financial withdrawals after filing could be scrutinized, which meant his corporate expense transfers could be audited. And if Red Mesa Consulting LLC was funded with marital assets, it was divisible property, 50% mine. At 11:05 a.m., I looked down at Noah sleeping peacefully beside me. 7 pounds, 11 ounces. Completely unaware that his father had planned a different state, a different life, and possibly a different custody arrangement. Without telling his mother, something inside me hardened, not into anger, into precision. Because this wasn't about revenge. Yet. This was about protection. And protection requires timing. I finally texted Chris back. We'll talk when you land in Phoenix. There was a pause. Then, his reply. I'm not coming back until Sunday. I smiled slightly because I already knew something he didn't. At 11:18 a.m., I received a notification from the Delta app. Flight DL603. Phoenix to Honolulu. Delayed. Mechanical issue. Estimated departure pushed back 3 hours. And that changed everything. Because Chris thought he was safely in the air. He thought he had distance. He thought I had no leverage, yet. But he was still on the ground. Still in Arizona. Still reachable. And I had just uncovered an LLC in Denver, funded with $40,000 of marital debt. What Chris didn't know was that I wasn't planning to call him. I was planning to call someone else first. At 11:31 a.m., I searched for one name, a name I'd seen once before on a parenting forum. A divorce attorney in Maricopa County, known for high-conflict financial cases. Her name was Rebecca Lynn Morales. And as I hovered over the call button, my phone buzzed one more time. A text from an unknown number. It read, "Is this Danielle Carter? I need to tell you what Chris said about your hospital stay." At 11:32 a.m., exactly 21 hours after my son was born, and while my husband was still stuck at Phoenix Sky Harbor, waiting for a delayed flight to Hawaii with his mistress, I received a text from an unknown number that said, "I need to tell you what Chris said about your hospital stay." I didn't reply immediately, because by that point, I had learned something critical. Information comes faster when you let people talk first. So I simply typed back, "Who is this?" The response came almost instantly. "Emily Rhodes, labor and delivery nurse. We met during your prenatal tour." It took me a second, but then I remembered. Tall, dark-haired nurse with a calm voice. She had walked us through the maternity wing 3 months earlier. Chris had asked a lot of questions that day. At the time, I thought he was being a responsible father. Now I understood something else entirely. I typed back, "Yes, what did he say?" There was a pause. 3 dots appearing and disappearing, like she was deciding how much to reveal. Then her message came through. He asked staff what documentation would be created if a mother showed signs of postpartum instability. My breath caught slightly. Because that wasn't casual curiosity. That was targeted. Before we go further, let me ask you something, because this question haunted me for weeks after. If you discovered your spouse had been quietly researching ways to prove you unfit as a parent before your child was even born, would you still try to save the marriage? Or would something inside you close permanently? Because in that moment, something inside me did close. Not violently, just definitively. I typed slowly. "When did he ask that?" Emily replied, "During your hospital tour in January. He pulled me aside while you were in the restroom." January. 5 months ago. That meant he had already been planning this long before he filed for divorce. Long before Hawaii. Long before Denver. This wasn't reactive. This was strategic from the start. Emily sent another message. I didn't think much of it at the time. Some fathers ask about postpartum depression resources. But he was very specific. He asked what behaviors get documented in medical charts. My hands went cold. Because medical documentation is powerful in custody cases. Notes about agitation, emotional instability, refusal of care. All of those can be cited later. Emily continued. He also asked whether hospitals ever notify social services if a mother seems overwhelmed. There it was. The full picture. Chris had been trying to build a legal narrative before I even gave birth. He wasn't just preparing for divorce. He was preparing for custody warfare. At 11:47 a.m., Emily sent one final message. "I didn't realize what was happening until I saw you here yesterday. I overheard him telling someone on the phone that you were already struggling mentally. That didn't sit right with me." I closed my eyes, because that confirmed something crucial. He wasn't just documenting privately. He was spreading a story publicly, laying groundwork. And here's something many people don't realize. In custody disputes, perception spreads before facts catch up. But facts still matter. And now, I had a witness, a medical professional, who could testify about his intentions. That changed everything. At 12:05 p.m., I finally made the call I had been preparing for. Rebecca Lynn Morales' law office answered on the third ring. "Morales Family Law. How can we help you?" "My name is Danielle Carter," I said calmly. "I gave birth yesterday, and I just discovered my husband filed for divorce 6 weeks ago, without serving me, drained marital funds into a hidden LLC, and is attempting to build a case for emergency custody." There was a brief pause. Then the receptionist said quietly, "Please hold." 30 seconds later, a steady, confident voice came on the line. "This is Rebecca Morales. Start from the beginning." I did. Not emotionally. Chronologically, charges, loans, beneficiary change, custody messages, Denver, LLC, the nurse's testimony. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a short silence. Then she said something that shifted the entire situation. "Danielle, your husband has made multiple critical legal mistakes." My pulse slowed. Such as, first, Filing for divorce without serving you, while continuing to move large sums of money, violates Arizona's preliminary injunction rules. She continued. Second, opening undisclosed credit lines and funding an LLC with marital assets makes that business subject to division. My hand tightened slightly around the phone. Third, she said, if he's been attempting to create a false narrative about your mental fitness, that can severely damage his credibility in court. Then she added something that made my chest go still. And fourth, if any corporate funds were misused, that's not a family court issue. That's potentially criminal. Criminal. That word landed heavily because I had sensed it. But hearing it confirmed changed the stakes completely. Rebecca's voice softened slightly. You're not in danger legally right now, Danielle. In fact, you're in a stronger position than he realizes. Stronger. I hadn't felt that word in days. She continued, but timing matters. Do not confront him yet. Let him keep talking. Let him keep believing you're unaware. I nodded instinctively. That's what I've been doing. Good, she said, because the next step is documentation and containment. Containment. That word resonated deeply, because that's exactly what this felt like now. Not a marriage ending, but a situation being contained before it caused irreversible damage. Rebecca gave me instructions. Secure all financial records. Do not leave the marital home. Do not engage emotionally in writing. And most importantly, let him come back thinking he still has control. Because when people think they're in control, they make mistakes. Big ones. At 12:41 p.m., I hung up the call. Noah stirred beside me. I placed my hand gently on his back, and for the first time since this began, I felt something unexpected. Not fear, not anger, but patience. Because I finally understood the battlefield. Chris thought this was a private divorce strategy. He didn't realize he had created exposure in 3 separate systems: family court, corporate compliance, and potentially criminal investigation. And he was about to walk back into Arizona, believing I was still the same quiet wife he left behind. But I wasn't. Because silence, when used correctly, becomes leverage. At 1:08 p.m., my phone buzzed again. A notification from Delta. Flight DL603 had finally departed. Chris was now in the air, on his way to Hawaii, on his way to spend 5 days, believing he had time. But what he didn't know was this. In Arizona family court, once a spouse becomes aware of undisclosed assets and financial misconduct, emergency motions can be filed immediately. And I had already scheduled a consultation appointment with Rebecca Morales for Monday morning, which meant by the time Chris returned from Hawaii, the legal landscape would look very different. But there was still one thing I didn't understand yet, one piece that hadn't been explained, because before I set my phone down, a final email from Melissa arrived. Subject line: you still don't know why Tom Reynolds is helping him. Inside was a single sentence. He's not just Chris's boss. At 1:09 p.m., while my husband's flight was finally in the air, somewhere over the Pacific, and my newborn son slept quietly beside me, I opened an email that said one simple sentence: Tom Reynolds isn't just Chris's boss. For a moment, I didn't move, because by then I had learned something important. When a sentence is that short, the truth behind it is usually complicated. And complicated truths tend to change everything. Before I continue, let me ask you something, because this is where the story shifted from betrayal into something far colder. Have you ever realized that someone helping your enemy wasn't doing it out of loyalty, but out of self-protection? Because that's exactly what this turned out to be. I replied to Melissa. What do you mean? Her response came almost immediately. They're related. My eyes narrowed. Related how? There was a longer pause this time. Then the message appeared. Tom Reynolds is Chris's uncle. I sat very still, because that explained too much all at once. The life insurance witness signature, the expense approvals, the relocation reimbursement, the quiet support for custody planning. It wasn't corporate favoritism. It was family protection. Chris hadn't just been building an exit plan. He'd been doing it with inside help from someone who had authority to cover his tracks. And suddenly, the scale of the deception expanded again. Because when a supervisor shields an employee's financial misconduct, that's not just unethical. It's a corporate liability risk. At 1:17 p.m., Melissa sent another message. They've been close since Chris was a kid. Tom helped him get the job 6 years ago. 6 years. That meant Tom had been in position long before our marriage began to fracture. He wasn't a recent ally. He was part of Chris's foundation, which meant something very important. Tom wasn't just enabling Chris's exit. He was invested in protecting himself, too. Because if corporate funds were misused under his approval, his job, maybe his career, would be at risk. And people protecting their own careers make predictable mistakes. They double down. They hide more. They talk too much to the wrong people. At 1:24 p.m., I typed back, "Why are you telling me all this?" Melissa didn't respond right away. Nearly 4 minutes passed. Then her message appeared. Because Tom's not just covering for Chris. He's planning to leave the company too. Leave. My pulse slowed. Explain. Her reply came in 2 parts. First message. They're trying to move clients to the Denver LLC. Second message. Red Mesa Consulting isn't just a side business. It's a competing operation. I closed my eyes briefly because that meant something serious. Very serious. Corporate client diversion. Using inside contacts to redirect business to a personal company can trigger lawsuits worth millions. And if Tom Reynolds was involved, this wasn't just Chris's scheme. It was a coordinated exit strategy. At that moment, something inside me shifted again. Not emotionally, strategically. Because this changed the battlefield entirely. This was no longer just a divorce with financial misconduct. This was potential corporate fraud and breach of fiduciary duty, which meant one thing. Chris had far more to lose than I did. And people who have a lot to lose become very cautious, very quiet, very desperate to control the narrative. At 1:36 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Chris, the first one since takeoff. "Wi-Fi on plane now. Please tell me you didn't talk to anyone yet." I stared at the message. It revealed everything. He wasn't asking about me, or the baby, or Emma. He was worried about exposure, about information leaking, about losing control. And here's something I realized in that moment. He thought the danger was external. Lawyers, courts, corporate audits. He didn't realize the real danger was much closer. It was inside his own network. Because Melissa wasn't just helping me. She had access, knowledge, context. And people inside collapsing operations often talk when they sense the ship is sinking. I typed back slowly. Number 1. I haven't told anyone. The lie was simple. Calm. Strategic. He replied instantly. Good. We can handle this privately when I get back. Privately. That word almost made me smile. Because he still believed this was something he could manage behind closed doors. But silence doesn't always protect people. Sometimes silence isolates them, and isolation makes mistakes louder. At 1:48 p.m., I looked down at Noah, his tiny fingers curled against the blanket, his breathing steady and soft. And I realized something deeply grounding. This wasn't about revenge anymore, not in the explosive sense. This was about stability, protection, long-term security. Because Chris's plan wasn't just to leave me. It was to take control of the narrative, the finances, and possibly our children's future. And I wasn't going to allow that. Not emotionally, not legally, not quietly, but strategically. At 2:03 p.m., Melissa sent one final message for the day. Tom and Chris have a meeting scheduled Monday morning, before you even see your lawyer. My eyes sharpened. What kind of meeting? Her response came seconds later, with a corporate compliance officer. Compliance. That word mattered. Because compliance meetings usually happen when someone senses internal risk, which meant either someone else inside the company had started asking questions, or Tom was trying to control the narrative before problems surfaced. Either way, it meant the situation was beginning to shift beyond Chris's control. And here's the quiet truth that settled into me at that moment. The most dangerous phase of any conflict isn't when someone attacks. It's when they start realizing their plan might fail. Because that's when they become unpredictable, desperate, and capable of making irreversible mistakes. I closed my eyes briefly, breathed slowly, and made a decision. I would not move fast. I would not confront. I would not reveal what I knew. Because Chris still believed I was shocked, emotional, overwhelmed. He didn't know I was already mapping timelines. legal leverage, financial exposures, and witness credibility. He thought he had time, but time was already shifting away from him. At 2:21 p.m., as the hospital room fell quiet again, and the afternoon light softened across the walls, my phone buzzed one more time. This time, it wasn't from Melissa. It was from Rebecca Morales. Just one short message. I reviewed the documents you sent, and beneath it, a second line that made my heart go completely still. You need to know something about the Denver property, because until that moment, I hadn't even realized there was a property involved at all. At 2:22 p.m., while my newborn son slept beside me and my husband was still somewhere over the Pacific, believing his plan was intact, I read a message from my lawyer that said, "You need to know something about the Denver property." I felt my pulse slow into that now familiar, controlled rhythm. Because when Rebecca Morales used the word property, she never meant something small. I typed back, "What property?" Her reply came less than 30 seconds later. Red Mesa Consulting, LLC, purchased a residential address 6 weeks ago. I stared at the screen. 6 weeks ago, the exact time frame when Chris secretly filed for divorce. Before we go further, I want to ask you something, because this moment still feels surreal, even now. If you discovered your spouse had quietly bought a house in another state while you were pregnant, would you see it as preparation for leaving or preparation for replacing you? Because I knew immediately which one this was. Rebecca sent the address. A 3-bedroom townhouse in a suburb outside Denver. Purchase price, $512,000. Down payment, $102,000. Mortgage under the LLC, not under Chris, personally, which meant something critical. He wasn't just planning to move. He was shielding assets from division. Because property owned by an LLC can complicate marital asset tracing unless you know exactly where the funding came from. And we did. The HELOC withdrawals, the corporate reimbursements, the relocation transfer, all of it flowed into Red Mesa Consulting, which flowed into that property. I leaned back slowly against the hospital pillow, because that house wasn't just a future residence. It was a symbol. Chris wasn't building an escape. He was building a replacement life, one that did not include me. At 2:37 p.m., Rebecca called me directly. Her voice was calm but precise. "Danielle, this changes the strategy timeline." How? Because once real estate purchases are involved, courts move faster. Judges don't like undisclosed interstate asset transfers. She paused, especially when children are involved. My hand tightened slightly around the phone. "So what do we do?" Her answer came clearly. "We prepare quietly. No confrontation yet. But we start containment steps." Containment. That word again. It had become the core of everything. Rebecca outlined the plan. Step 1. Secure full financial discovery documentation. Step 2. File an emergency motion to freeze marital asset transfers. Step 3. Document custody narrative manipulation. Step 4. Prepare corporate compliance evidence. Each step required patience, timing, precision, no emotional reactions. Because emotional reactions tip off the other side. And right now, Chris still believed I was unaware. That was our advantage. At 3:05 p.m., after the call ended, I looked down at Noah. His tiny chest rose and fell steadily. He had no idea his father had already bought another home, another future, another life, waiting in a different state. Something inside me shifted again, not into anger, into resolve. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about ensuring my children's stability could not be uprooted by someone else's secret plan. At 3:22 p.m., Melissa emailed again, this time with a subject line, "Vanessa doesn't know everything." I opened it immediately. Inside was a screenshot of a text conversation between Vanessa and someone saved as L. Vanessa wrote, "Chris says, once the divorce is final, we can move into the Denver place together." The reply asked, "You sure he's really divorced?" Vanessa answered, "He showed me the filing papers. Said she signed months ago but is dragging things." I felt a cold stillness spread through me, because that confirmed something important. Chris wasn't just lying to me. He was lying to her, too. He had told Vanessa I'd already signed divorce papers, that I was delaying, that I was the obstacle. That narrative served two purposes. It kept Vanessa invested, and it painted me as unreasonable. Classic manipulation. But here's what Chris didn't understand. Lies that large require maintenance, and maintenance creates evidence trails. At 3:41 p.m., I did something very deliberate. I stopped digging. I stopped searching. I closed all financial portals because there's a point in any investigation where gathering more information too quickly becomes counterproductive. Rebecca had explained it clearly. Once you know enough to establish a pattern, stop. Let them keep acting normally. Because continued behavior creates stronger legal leverage than immediate confrontation. And we had enough. We had undisclosed debt, secret divorce filing, custody narrative manipulation, corporate fund misuse, hidden LLC, out-of-state property purchase, beneficiary replacement. That wasn't just a case. That was a timeline of intent. At 4:18 p.m., my hospital room grew quiet as visiting hours ended. The sunlight softened into late afternoon gold. Noah slept. Machines hummed softly. And for the first time since this began, I allowed myself a moment of stillness. Not to grieve, but to think long-term. Because revenge wasn't what I wanted. Control wasn't even what I wanted. What I wanted was stability. Protection. Truth documented so thoroughly that it couldn't be rewritten later. At 5:02 p.m., my phone buzzed again. A text from Chris. Plane landing soon. Please don't make any decisions until we talk. I read the words calmly. He still believed he had leverage. Still believed this was a negotiation. Still believed I needed explanations. He didn't understand something fundamental. When someone prepares quietly for months, and the other person finally discovers everything at once, the emotional stage is already over. What remains is execution. I didn't reply, because silence now served a different purpose. It kept him guessing. It prevented him from recalibrating. And it encouraged him to keep behaving normally, which meant more evidence. At 5:19 p.m., Melissa sent one final message for the day. Tom scheduled the compliance meeting for Monday afternoon instead of morning. My eyes narrowed slightly. Why the change? Her reply came seconds later. Because someone else requested to attend. Someone else. I felt a slow, heavy certainty settle in my chest. Because compliance meetings don't usually expand unless something serious is suspected. I typed, "Who?" There was a longer pause this time, nearly a full minute. Then her message appeared. The company's external legal counsel. I leaned back slowly, because that meant something very specific. It meant the situation inside Chris's company had already escalated beyond internal review. It meant legal risk was being evaluated. It meant someone somewhere had already noticed irregularities. And that meant Chris's timeline was collapsing faster than he realized. But there was still one piece missing, one detail that hadn't surfaced yet, something Rebecca had hinted at earlier, but hadn't explained fully. At 6:03 p.m., just as the evening light dimmed and the hospital room fell into quiet shadow, my phone buzzed again. A new message from Rebecca Morales. Only one sentence. You need to prepare for the possibility that Chris may try to take Emma before Monday. At 6:04 p.m., with my newborn son sleeping beside me and my husband freshly landed in Honolulu, I read a message from my lawyer that said, "You need to prepare for the possibility that Chris may try to take Emma before Monday." My daughter was 4 years old. 4. And suddenly the battlefield shifted from financial containment to physical protection. If you're a mother, you already know there's a line you can stay calm about money, reputation, even betrayal. But when it comes to your child, something ancient rises inside you. Before I continue, let me ask you this. If you suspected someone might try to remove your child under a false narrative of instability, would you wait for proof? Or would you act preemptively? I didn't hesitate. I called Lauren. "Don't bring Emma home tonight," I said quietly. "Keep her with you." There was no drama in my voice, no panic. Just instruction. Lauren didn't ask questions. She had seen enough screenshots to understand. "Okay," she said. "How long?" "Until Monday, at least." Because Monday was when we would file. Rebecca had already outlined the emergency motion. Temporary orders for custody. Asset freeze request. Notice of financial misconduct. The key was filing before Chris could initiate anything from his side. Because whoever files first in high-conflict custody cases often controls the narrative. And Chris had already tried to control it once. He wouldn't get a second attempt. At 6:22 p.m., I texted him back for the first time since his plane landed. "How's Hawaii?" His reply came within seconds. "It's fine. Please tell me Emma's okay." There it was. Not, "How are you?" Not, "How's the baby?" Straight to Emma. I typed slowly, "She's safe." His response came quickly. "Good. I might bring her out here this summer. Fresh start could be good for her." Fresh start. Out here. Summer. The audacity almost impressed me, because that meant he was still speaking as if relocation was inevitable, as if custody was already settled, as if I were a temporary obstacle. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the message to Rebecca. Within 3 minutes, she called. "That text is useful," she said immediately. Because it implies premeditated relocation involving a minor child before custody is determined. Her tone sharpened slightly. Judges do not like unilateral relocation planning. I felt a steady calm settle deeper inside me, because for the first time, Chris's overconfidence was becoming leverage. At 7:05 p.m., after the nurses dimmed the hallway lights, I opened my laptop and began preparing something very specific. A timeline, dates, transactions, filings, messages, every event organized chronologically. Because in court, clarity wins. Emotion confuses. And I was done being confused. I documented. January hospital tour inquiry about postpartum documentation. February, HELOC opened. March, Denver, LLC registered. April, beneficiary changed. 6 weeks ago, divorce petition filed. 5 weeks ago, Denver townhouse purchased. 3 weeks ago, relocation transfer sent. Yesterday, Hawaii trip during childbirth. Today, text about relocating Emma. Patterns are powerful when presented cleanly. At 8:11 p.m., Melissa emailed again. This time, her message was shorter. Compliance meeting. Moved again. My eyes narrowed. When? Tomorrow morning. Emergency session. Emergency. That meant someone inside the company had accelerated the timeline, which meant one of two things. Either Tom was panicking, or someone else had uncovered something independently. I typed back. "Do they know about Denver?" Her reply came seconds later. "They know about client diversion concerns." Client diversion. That was corporate language for stealing customers. If Red Mesa Consulting was already approaching clients, that meant Chris wasn't planning a clean break. He was planning a takeover. And if compliance was meeting early, that meant someone had reported it. Possibly anonymously. Possibly internally. But here's what struck me hardest. Chris was in Hawaii, unreachable in person, while his company was holding an emergency compliance meeting. He didn't know yet. And that kind of delayed awareness creates panic when it hits. At 9:03 p.m., my phone buzzed again. "Chris, Vanessa says you looked at her profile today." I stared at the message. "So she noticed?" Or he asked. "Interesting," I replied calmly. "I wanted to see who you replaced me with." 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, "You're twisting this." Classic. Deny. Deflect. Minimize. Then came the next message. "I filed because you've been unstable for months. I had to protect the kids." There it was. Layer 2 of the custody narrative, now delivered directly. Unstable. Protect. Kids. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. Because arguments create emotional records. Silence creates strategic space. Instead, I typed one sentence. "I spoke with my OB today." The typing dots disappeared. Then came a single reply. Oh, that one word carried something new. Uncertainty. Because if my doctor contradicted his narrative, his foundation weakened. And foundations matter in custody cases. At 9:47 p.m., I lay back in the hospital bed, exhaustion finally creeping in. But beneath the fatigue was something steady. Not fear, not rage, control. Because Chris believed he was still 3 steps ahead. He didn't know. The LLC funding was traceable. The beneficiary change was documented. The custody narrative had witnesses. The corporate compliance team was meeting without him, and emergency custody filings were being prepared. He thought Monday was his next move. He didn't realize Monday might collapse his entire strategy. As I closed my eyes, my phone buzzed one last time that night. A message from Melissa. Only 4 words. They subpoenaed internal emails. My eyes opened again. Because subpoenas don't happen casually. They happen when legal risk is confirmed. And if internal emails were being pulled, that meant Tom Reynolds' involvement was now under scrutiny too, which meant Chris wasn't just at risk of losing control in family court. He was at risk of losing control everywhere. But there was still something I didn't understand. One question that hadn't been answered. Why had compliance acted so quickly? Who tipped them off? Because I hadn't contacted the company. Rebecca hadn't either. And Melissa claimed she hadn't reported anything formally. So who triggered the investigation? At 10:02 p.m., my phone vibrated again. A number I didn't recognize. Colorado area code. The message read, "This is Vanessa. We need to talk." At 10:03 p.m., less than 36 hours after I gave birth, and exactly 3,200 miles away from where my husband believed he was building a new life, I received a text from a Colorado number that said, "This is Vanessa. We need to talk." I stared at it for a full 10 seconds, because when the other woman reaches out directly, it means one of two things. She's either confident or she's scared. And based on the timing, the emergency compliance meeting, the subpoenaed internal emails, I knew which one this was. Before I tell you what she said, let me ask you something. If the woman your husband planned to replace you with suddenly contacted you, would you attack her or would you listen? I chose to listen. I typed back, "What do you want to discuss?" Her reply came almost immediately. "I didn't know you hadn't signed divorce papers." There it was. The crack. Not in my marriage. In his narrative, I didn't respond emotionally. I responded with a question. "What did he tell you?" There was a pause. Then, "He said you've been separated for almost a year, that you refused to accept it publicly." Almost a year. We had conceived Noah 8 months ago, which meant Chris had been living two realities simultaneously. Vanessa continued, "He said you were struggling mentally, and that filing was to protect the kids." Protect the kids. Same language. Scripted. Rehearsed. Repeated. That consistency mattered because it showed intent. And intent is powerful in court. I kept my tone even. "Did he show you proof of a finalized divorce?" "No," she replied. "Just filing paperwork." Filing, not finalization. That distinction is critical legally because filing doesn't equal separation, and presenting it as such can qualify as misrepresentation. At 10:14 p.m., she sent another message. "He also said the Denver house was purchased after your settlement agreement." Settlement agreement. There had never been one. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Validation. Because Chris hadn't just lied to me. He'd lied to her about timelines, which meant she wasn't an accomplice. She was another manipulated party. And manipulated parties become unpredictable when they realize they were misled. I typed, "There is no settlement agreement. I found out about the divorce yesterday." 3 minutes passed. Then, "He told me you were served in March." March. He filed in April. The timeline didn't even align. His lies were unraveling. At 10:21 p.m., Vanessa sent something unexpected, a screenshot. It was a photo of the Denver townhouse. Interior. Furniture partially staged. On the kitchen counter sat a printed document. I zoomed in. It was a draft partnership agreement between Christopher M. Carter and Vanessa L. Porter. Revenue split, 60-40. But what caught my attention wasn't the split. It was a clause near the bottom. Upon dissolution finalization, assets may be restructured without marital interference. Marital interference. He had written that into a legal draft, which meant premeditation, which meant awareness that assets were still marital, which meant intentional concealment. My breathing slowed, because this was now more than betrayal. This was documented intent to shield assets from a spouse during active marriage, and that is catastrophic in family court. I typed carefully, "Why are you showing me this?" Her reply was immediate. "Because I just found out about the compliance investigation." There it was, the trigger. So that's who tipped compliance. Vanessa. I didn't respond. She continued, "They called Chris tonight. He's freaking out." I imagined it clearly. Chris in a resort suite. Ocean outside. Panic rising as corporate legal counsel requested an emergency call while I sat in a hospital bed with our newborn. The contrast almost felt cinematic. Vanessa sent another message. "He told me someone is trying to sabotage him." Of course he did. That's stage 2 of collapse. Deny. Blame. Victimize. Then she wrote something that shifted everything. I didn't know about the HELOC. My eyes sharpened. He told me he funded Denver with his performance bonuses, which meant he had concealed debt from her too. And if she believed she was investing in a clean business venture, learning it was financed through undisclosed marital debt could destabilize her confidence. And when partners lose confidence, they withdraw. At 10:37 p.m., my phone buzzed again, this time from Chris. 3 rapid texts. Did you talk to Vanessa? Why is she acting weird? Danielle, what did you say? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I typed one sentence to Vanessa first. Did you report the client diversion? There was a long pause, nearly 5 minutes. Then, I asked someone in compliance if using company reimbursements to fund a private LLC was allowed. Not a direct accusation, just a question. But questions trigger audits, and audits trigger subpoenas, and subpoenas pull email chains, which meant Tom Reynolds' involvement was now exposed too. I finally responded to Chris. I told her the truth. His reply came instantly. You're destroying everything. There it was. Not you're hurting me, not you're misunderstanding. Destroying everything, which meant he knew something was collapsing. I typed back 3 words. You did that. Then I put my phone down, because this stage, the public unraveling, requires composure. And Monday was approaching. Rebecca had already drafted the emergency motion. By the time Chris landed back in Arizona, asset freeze would be filed, custody orders requested, financial disclosure compelled. And now there was something even stronger. A third-party witness, Vanessa, who could confirm misrepresentation and financial concealment. At 11:12 p.m., Vanessa sent one last message. I'm not moving to Denver. Simple. Decisive. That meant the partnership was unstable, which meant Red Mesa Consulting's foundation was cracking before it even launched. At 11:27 p.m., Chris called. I let it ring. Then he left a voicemail. His voice wasn't calm anymore. It wasn't controlled. It wasn't strategic. It was strained. You have no idea what you're doing. If compliance reports this wrong, I could lose everything. Lose everything. That phrase echoed quietly, because that's what he had been preparing me for. Loss, financial instability, custody vulnerability, isolation. And now he was staring at the possibility himself. As the hospital room fell quiet again, and Noah's breathing remained steady beside me, I realized something important. We were no longer in the quiet preparation phase. We were entering exposure. And exposure in corporate environments doesn't happen privately. It happens in conference rooms, with legal counsel present, with documentation displayed, with witnesses called. Monday wasn't just a filing day anymore. It was a reckoning day. But there was one final twist I hadn't anticipated. At 11:53 p.m., just as I closed my eyes to finally sleep, my phone buzzed again. A text from Rebecca. They've invited you to attend the compliance meeting. At 11:54 p.m., 40 hours after I gave birth, and less than 72 hours before my husband thought he could reset his life in Denver, I read a message from my attorney that said, they've invited you to attend the compliance meeting. I didn't feel shock. I felt inevitability, because exposure was always going to end in a room with witnesses. Before I tell you what happened in that room, let me ask you something. If you had the chance to confront the people who helped dismantle your marriage knot in your living room, not in private texts, but in a formal conference room with legal counsel present, would you go, or would you let your lawyer handle it? I went, not emotionally, not dramatically, but strategically. Monday morning arrived, with sterile Arizona sunlight pouring across our kitchen counters. I had been discharged from the hospital the night before. Noah slept in a bassinet beside the couch. Emma was still at Lawrence. Chris's flight was scheduled to land at 10:12 a.m. The compliance meeting was at 1 p.m. Rebecca had advised me to attend virtually, not as a spouse, but as a materially impacted party, because once marital assets are involved in potential corporate misconduct, the spouse becomes relevant to disclosure accuracy. At 12:47 p.m., I logged into the secure video link Rebecca sent. The screen populated slowly. Corporate Legal Counsel, HR Director, 2 compliance officers, Tom Reynolds. And finally, at 12:59 p.m., Chris. He looked tired, sunburned slightly, still wearing vacation casual clothes. He hadn't expected this to escalate while he was gone. The external counsel began calmly. This meeting concerns potential diversion of company resources and conflicts of interest. Tom's jaw tightened. Chris attempted composure. I'm not sure what this is about. Classic. Deny. Stage 1. The compliance officer displayed documents on screen. Expense authorizations. Wire transfers. Approval signatures. Emails referencing transition strategy. Then the Denver LLC registration appeared, followed by the townhouse purchase record. Chris's expression changed, just slightly. Then came the email chain discussing custody timing relative to relocation. That's when he shifted into stage 2. Blame. This is being taken out of context, he said. These were exploratory plans. Exploratory. The counsel's voice remained steady. Exploratory plans do not involve transferring clients preemptively. Then they displayed the subpoenaed internal emails. Emails between Tom and Chris discussing which accounts could be transitioned quietly. Tom cleared his throat. This was misunderstood strategic planning. Strategic. Another attempt at reframing. Then Rebecca unmuted her microphone. Her voice was calm. May I clarify something? The counsel nodded. Rebecca continued. The funds used to establish Red Mesa Consulting originated from a home equity line of credit opened during active marriage. That debt is jointly attributable. The room shifted subtly. Because now, this wasn't just corporate ethics. It was financial liability intersecting with marital law. Rebecca went on. Additionally, Mr. Carter filed for dissolution without serving my client, continued asset transfers post-filing, and represented himself as legally separated in third-party agreements. She paused deliberately. We have documentation. Silence filled the conference call. Chris shifted into stage 3. Victim. This is a personal matter being weaponized, he said. My marriage was over. I was protecting myself. Protecting himself. Not the company. Not compliance. Himself. The external counsel leaned forward. Mr. Carter. Did you disclose the existence of an active marriage when signing the Denver property documents under the LLC? Chris hesitated. A full 3 seconds. Then, I believed it was effectively dissolved. Belief is not documentation. The counsel nodded slowly. We have reason to believe fiduciary obligations were breached. Tom finally spoke again. We can resolve this internally, but it was too late for that. Because at 1:26 p.m., the compliance officer displayed the final document, the draft partnership agreement Vanessa had provided. Specifically, the clause about asset restructuring without marital interference. The counsel's voice lowered slightly. Mr. Carter, this language indicates awareness of ongoing marital property claims. Chris didn't answer immediately, and in that silence, something broke. Not loudly, but visibly. The confidence drained first, then the posture. Then the controlled tone, because documentation doesn't argue. It accumulates. At 1:34 p.m., counsel concluded. Pending further investigation, Mr. Carter and Mr. Reynolds are placed on administrative leave, effective immediately. Tom's face went pale. Chris's jaw clenched. This is outrageous, he said. But outrage doesn't override evidence. The meeting ended at 1:41 p.m. No yelling. No dramatic exits, just formal suspension and legal review. As the screen went dark, Rebecca turned to me quietly. This changes leverage significantly. I nodded. Because this wasn't revenge. This was consequence. And consequences shift negotiations. At 2:12 p.m., Chris called. I answered this time. His voice was no longer confident. What did you do? There it was again. As if exposure originated from me, I responded calmly. I told the truth. You've ruined my career. No, I said evenly. You did. Silence filled the line. Then he tried one final pivot. If I lose my job, child support changes. Think about that. Financial intimidation. Predictable. I didn't react. Temporary custody orders are being filed today, I said calmly. And asset freeze. He exhaled sharply. You're going nuclear. I answered with one sentence that I had been holding for days. You mistook my silence for weakness. There it was. One of those sentences people clip into short videos later, because it was true. At 3:05 p.m., Rebecca filed the emergency motions. Asset freeze. Temporary primary custody. Financial disclosure demand. By 4:17 p.m., Confirmation came through. Hearing scheduled within 10 days. Chris texted once more that evening. Just 3 words. We can settle. Settlement. The word he thought he controlled months ago, now offered under pressure. But here's the truth about leverage. You don't use it to destroy. You use it to stabilize. And for the first time since this began, I felt something settle completely inside me. Not rage, not triumph, closure forming. But there was still one final step. Because consequences in court are private. Consequences in family are not. And Chris still hadn't faced the one audience he feared most, his own parents. At 6:02 p.m., my phone buzzed again. A message from his mother. Danielle, we need to discuss what Christopher has done. At 6:03 p.m., 48 hours after I gave birth, and less than a week after my husband believed he could quietly replace me, I received a message from his mother that said, "We need to discuss what Christopher has done. Not what happened, not the situation, what he has done." Past tense. Acknowledge. If you've ever watched the truth reach the final circle, the family members who can no longer deny it, you know that moment feels very different from confrontation. It feels quiet, I replied simply. I'm available tomorrow afternoon, because by then, I no longer needed urgency. Everything that mattered was already moving through official channels. The emergency custody motion had been filed. The asset freeze request was active. Corporate compliance had placed Chris on administrative leave. And Red Mesa Consulting, the Denver dream, was already collapsing. Vanessa had withdrawn. Tom Reynolds was under investigation. And Chris was finally experiencing the reality he had tried to construct for me. Loss of control. The next afternoon, his parents came to my house. His mother, Linda Carter. His father, George Carter. They sat at the dining table where Chris and I had once hosted holiday dinners. The same table where we announced my second pregnancy 9 months earlier. Linda's eyes were red, but she didn't cry. She looked directly at me. We saw the documents. Not accusations, not questions, just acknowledgement. George exhaled heavily. He told us you were unstable. There it was. The narrative finally spoken, aloud in the open. I answered calmly. My medical records contradict that. Linda nodded slowly. Yes, we saw those too. Silence settled for a moment. Then she said something that surprised me. Christopher didn't just lie to you. He lied to everyone. And that was the truth that had taken 12 chapters to fully surface. Layer 1 was betrayal. Layer 2 was deception. But layer 3, the deepest truth, was that Chris had built an entire alternate reality sustained by lies. And once lies expand that far, they collapse completely. Linda reached into her purse and placed a small folder on the table. Inside were printed statements, a letter, and a check. The amount written was $40,000. Exactly what I had contributed to the original house down payment. George spoke quietly. This isn't a settlement. This is restitution. I looked at them. Not emotionally, just steadily. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. Because restitution isn't about money. It's about acknowledgement, recognition that harm was done. And that recognition matters more than revenge ever could. A week later, the temporary custody hearing took place. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It was procedural. Documentation presented. Medical statements reviewed. Financial records examined. Chris's attorney attempted to argue emotional instability. But the timeline contradicted him. The judge's ruling was calm and precise. Temporary primary custody granted to me. Financial disclosures ordered. Asset transfers frozen, pending division. And Chris was instructed not to relocate or remove the children from Arizona. The system worked exactly as it was designed to, when evidence is clear. After the hearing, Chris tried one last time to speak to me privately. His voice sounded tired. Not angry, just hollow. I didn't think it would go this far. That sentence stayed with me because it revealed everything. He hadn't thought about consequences. He had only thought about outcomes. I answered quietly. You didn't think I would see everything. He didn't reply, and that was the final moment between us that mattered. Not dramatic, not loud, just the end of illusion. Months passed. Corporate investigations concluded. Chris resigned before formal termination. Tom Reynolds lost his position. Red Mesa Consulting dissolved before it ever opened a client account. The Denver townhouse was eventually sold, and during financial division proceedings, the court ruled it was marital property funded through undisclosed debt. Half the proceeds were awarded to me, not as revenge, as legal equity. Life slowly became quiet. Noah grew. Emma adjusted. Our home felt calmer than it had in years. One evening, about 8 months later, I sat alone on the back patio after putting the kids to bed. The Arizona sky stretched wide and still above me, crickets humming softly, a warm breeze moving through the trees. I held a cup of tea and realized something simple. I wasn't thinking about Chris anymore. Not with anger, not with pain, just with distance. Because karma doesn't always look like dramatic downfall. Sometimes it looks like this: losing the life you tried to replace, watching stability slip away, and realizing too late that silence isn't weakness. It's observation, it's patience, it's preparation. And here's the truth I want to leave you with. Revenge isn't about destroying someone. It's about refusing to let them destroy you. That's the real victory. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had someone mistake your quiet for surrender, make sure to like and subscribe, because the next story I'm going to tell involves a woman who discovered her fiancé had been secretly married for 7 years, and she found out in the most public way imaginable. Trust me, you won't see that one coming.